Good morning. I see everybody's got their warm clothing on this morning. Our opening words are by Meg Barnhouse, who is the senior minister at the UU Church of Austin, Texas. She writes, "Years ago, I came into this Unitarian Universalist community of faith. I thought, I'm home. I listened to people talk sometimes about liberal religion as if it's thin gruel, watered down to please everyone. Our 7 principles, they complain, are either too much like a creed or so general as to be meaningless. My experience of the principles is that they are deeply demanding. The first one asks me to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, which means that I can no longer subscribe to the cheerful Calvinist doctrine of the total depravity of human nature. It sounds grim, but really, if you are in fact starting with a totally depraved nature, the opportunities for self-congratulation are boundless. I didn't knock over that 7-Eleven this morning, even though money is tight. I'm a good person. Now I have to struggle with the worth and dignity of people who do unspeakably awful things, whereas the doctrine of total depravity made that one a no-brainer. I'm supposed to value the democratic process, hearing the voices of everyone equally, allowing everyone to have a say. The UU principles are demanding enough to make me whine. For those who feel they are thin gruel, I have a suggestion. Let's stick something onto the end of every principle that will stop us from smiling and nodding comfortably as they are read. How about attaching beginning in our homes and congregations? Then we'd be faced with affirming things like the goal of peace, liberty, and justice for all, beginning in our homes and congregations. Everyone who's raised children knows that peace is often at odds with liberty and that justice demands a disturbance of that peace. To put these 3 together in one principle is outrageous and lovely. It's easier to think about working towards them in a global context than in the context of Cheerios and pajamas, car keys, and one's bedroom, cleaning one's bedroom. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, beginning in our homes and congregations, is a sobering ideal. I don't know about you, but I have sat in meetings about right relations and seen people get testy with one another. Some of the nastiest behavior I've seen was long ago at a community workshop for peace activists. Lao Tse, quoted in the back of our hymn book, says, "Peace in the world begins with peace in the home, which begins with peace in the heart." If I start with my own heart, the demands of our principles gets even heavier. Peace and compassion in my heart. Justice, too, freedom as well, affirming the worth and dignity of every person all the time, not only in my words and behavior, but now in my secret heart. If we added in the heart to the principles, they might as well just say, be Jesus and be done with it. I'm sorry I even brought it up. For me, the heart of liberal faith is to be connected to something greater than yourself, to wallow in the spirit of life, love, and truth, to have fair trade coffee in important conversations, to stand for love and to stand against quibbling, complaining, and flouncing off in a huff, to move towards being in right relationship with ourselves, with one another, and the planet. For me, this faith is a thin gruel. It's not even a rich or hearty gruel. It's walnuts and bananas, pancakes, mangoes, arugula, ginger, and avocado. The feast is prepared with effort, enjoyment, persistence, and commitment. Would you care to join me? Our first hymn is number 358, Rank by Rank, in our hymnal. Please stand and sing with all your might, as you are able.
Welcome to First Parish in Bedford, a Unitarian, Universalist congregation. I'm Reverend Annie Gonzalez, your Minister of Faith Development, and I'm so glad you've chosen to join us on this February morning, the first Sunday of February break for those who are in schools that have that. And here at First Parish in Bedford, as we will be exploring throughout this service, we do our best to practice Unitarian Universalism, whatever the heck that is. And we'll talk more about it throughout the service, but I think Joe Pompei got us off to a very good start with those opening words. We gather here to try to be the best versions of ourselves together. If you are visiting or newer to our community, you are warmly invited to fill out a blue visitor card that we can collect during the offering. And if you're joining us on Zoom, you can do so online as well. And I have a couple announcements of other ways to have fun at First Parish. There's a games afternoon planned next Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. in the common room, and it's fun for all ages. Jen McLean clarifies it's not a kid drop-off event, though. It is a come with your children event. And so I've been enjoying our games club with our 3rd to 5th graders on Wednesdays. They're pretty fun, and so I would say that this would be a great all-ages event, and I hope you'll show up and have some fun. Another fun event is the Cabaret, which is coming up on March 2nd, which is a Saturday, and I think that you can still sign up to be in the Cabaret. It's for all ages, and I know that Natan Wythe, our youth choirs director, was particularly interested in adding some skits to the mix. So if being in a skit is anywhere within your realm of possibility, consider it. Think about it. If not, whatever, you should just come enjoy the Cabaret. That's what I'm going to do, and it's at 7 p.m. on Saturday, March 2nd, right here at First Parish. With that, I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and join us in our unison affirmation that is printed in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia. Y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto. Vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en espíritu de amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros.
I got a fun one today. Called the Answer Mountain. So long ago, there was a town that was in the shadow of a very big mountain. And on the side of the mountain were the words carved into it, "The answer is no." No one knew where the words came from or why they were there. They just always been there. But the townspeople kind of appreciated it because whenever they had a question, all they had to do was look up at the mountain and read the answer, which was always no. And making decisions was very simple, and life went on smoothly and easily. And then one day, Ma Custis was about to make dinner for her family, and she just couldn't decide, because sometimes you can't. Who's been there? Yeah. Sometimes you can't, whether to make stew or steak, pasta, potatoes, dumplings, donuts. So she went out into the yard and she said to the mountain, "Should I make liver for dinner tonight?" And she looked up and the mountain said, "No." Oh, all right, I knew that already, Ma Custis thought. Nobody's really crazy about liver. But maybe I should make steak for dinner. She looked at the mountain. No. Chicken? No. Tacos? Tofu? Baked beans? Broccoli? Popcorn? No. No. No, no, no. Ma Custis kept asking questions, and the sun went down behind the mountain, and she kept asking, and the mountain kept saying no. And because she couldn't get an answer that was any kind of answer, nobody ate dinner that night. So she gave up the next day and just made liver anyway, even though the mountain said no, and everyone hated liver, but because liver was the first thing that she thought of, it was just easier. But Ma Custis had had enough. She glared at the mountain. She stamped her foot, says, "Why is the answer always no? Why can't you just say yes for once?" That is also the refrain of every middle schooler who asks for a phone. So Ma turned around and stomped away, rang the town bell, called the town meeting, and the whole town came running. And she told her story, and she said, "It seems to me that we've got a problem. The mountain just isn't helping us like it should. Seems to me it would be very nice if it would say yes for a while." The townsfolk knew Ma Custis had a point, but they didn't like changing something that had been the same for so long. But they thought about it, and then they decided that it should be recarved. So Mason Sharp, the stone carver, said, "Well, I could do the carving, I could do that." And so Mason spent the next 2 weeks up on the side of the mountain, chiseling and chipping away. And when he was done, the mountain said, "The answer is yes." So Ma Custis, who started this, came right to the front of the crowd. She figured she ought to be the first person to question this new and different mountain, since she discovered the problem with the old one. So she stepped right up and said, "Should I make liver for dinner tonight?" And the mountain said, "The answer is yes." Well, now Ma Custis almost fell over with surprise. "But Pa Custis told me he'd never forgive me if I served liver again. And all my kids threatened to hide in the barn for a week. Should I really serve liver?" And the mountain said, "Yes." And the townspeople said, I don't know if this is right. And Ma said, "Well, I can't serve liver again. I promised I wouldn't." So she says to the mountain, "Are you telling me I should break my promise?" And the mountain said, "Yes." At this point, everybody was just confused. How are we going to do this? And then somebody, the very littlest of the Custis kids, said, "Wait a second. Why does there have to be just one answer? Can't we have more than one answer?" And the townspeople, unbelievable. No one thought of such a thing. So they decided that the mountain should say, the answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no, sometimes wait and see, and sometimes I just don't know. Mason, the stone carver, was listening to this, and he's like, I think I can do that, but it's going to take some time. So we'll see what I can do. So the funny thing is that for a little while, Mason worked on the mountain, but he kind of got tired of it. But the townspeople were going about their lives being able to make much more decisions together and on their own and think it through. And so finally, Mason just put a sign and said, "The answer is under construction." I hope you find many answers that you get to construct both in community and in your families. And I now invite our pre-K through 8th graders to head to the Overlook Room with me and B for our Quiet Sunday activities, and for you to all sing the Children's Blessing by Jason Shelton. Thank you all.
I invite you to join in singing our simple hymn, Spirit of Life, as we continue to hold those joys and sorrows that we've heard spoken and those that go unspoken in our hearts this morning.
Gosh, that is one of my all-time favorite hymns. It always gets me right here. Our offering is an affirmation. It's a yes. When we give, we say yes to something we value. With our gifts freely given, may we say yes to the values of our faith and to our blessed community. I would invite you all to imagine that we somehow got into Mr. Peabody's Wayback Machine, all of us, and suddenly we're sitting here and it's 1841, and Sanctuary doesn't look a whole lot different. Maybe that's not here. And I'm not sure if the pulpit was there, the big pulpit. No. Well, anyway, here we are. It's 1841. This is excerpts from The Transient and Permanent in Christianity by Theodore Parker. Now, Parker was a Unitarian minister, a transcendentalist, and an abolitionist. He delivered this famous sermon at the ordination of a fellow Unitarian minister in Boston on May 19, 1841. It's a little difficult to read, so bear with me, okay? Yet there are some who are affrighted by the faintest rustle which a heretic makes among the dry leaves of theology. They tremble lest Christianity itself should perish without hope. On the other hand, a few bad men and a few pious men, it is said, on both sides of the water, tell us the day Christianity is past. The latter, it is alleged, would persuade us that hereafter piety must take a new form. The teachings of Jesus are to be passed by. That religion is to wing her way sublime above the flight of Christianity, far away towards heaven, as the fledged eaglet leaves forever the nest which sheltered its callow youth. Let us therefore devote a few moments to this subject and consider what is transient in Christianity and what is permanent therein. To turn away from the disputes of the Catholics and Protestants, the Unitarian and Trinitarians, and Old School and the New School, and to come to the plain words of Jesus of Nazareth, Christianity is a very simple thing, very simple. It is absolute pure morality, absolute pure religion, the love of man, the love of God acting without let or hindrance. The whole extent of Christianity is so well summed up in the command, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." And is there anything therein that can perish? No. The very opponents of Christianity have rarely found fault with the teachings of Jesus. My friends, if you received the notions about Christianity which chance to be current in your sect or church, solely because they are current, and thus accept the commandment of men instead of God's truth, there will always be enough to commend you for your soundness of judgment, of prudence, and of good sense, enough to call you Christian for that reason. But if this is all you rely upon, alas for you, you will be afraid of every new opinion, lest it shake down your church. The smallest contradiction in the New Testament or Old Testament, the least disagreement between the law and the gospel, any mistakes by the apostles, they will weaken your faith. If, on the other hand, you take the true word of God, if you take the true word of God and live out this, nothing shall harm you. Men may mock, but mouthfuls of wind shall be blown back upon their face. If the master of the house were called Beelzebub, it matters little what name is given to the household. The name Christian given in mockery will last till the world go down. He that loves God and man and lives in accordance with that love needs not fear what man can do to him. His religion comes to him in this hour of sadness. It lays its hand on him when he has fallen among thieves and raises him up, heals and comforts him.
A few months ago, I found myself trying to explain over dinner the relationship between Unitarian Universalism and Christianity. It was one of those conversations where people were surprised to learn that Christian theology was not a core tenet of Unitarian Universalism. In this particular conversation, I was talking to two Jewish people who go to temple together, and they were like, "But you go to a church on a Sunday morning." And I said, "That's true." And I explained that it was a little bit like secular Christmas. You know how a lot of people celebrate Christmas, and they put up a Christmas tree and they do Santa Claus, but they don't really focus it at all about Jesus. I said, well, we're sort of like secular Christmas. We look like Christianity in a lot of ways, but we don't really talk about Jesus too much. I thought this was a fairly good analogy, so I used it again at a party I was at recently when I was asked by a couple people I was chatting with what I did for work. I try to avoid that question at parties, but it always seems to come up. So once I admitted that I was a minister and I was a Unitarian Universalist, I then had to answer some questions. Now, this secular Christmas analogy worked really great for one of the people who had a UU friend growing up, but it was not landing very well for the former evangelical who was a trans man and had a lot of religious trauma. He had a lot of questions for me about Unitarian Universalism. If you don't believe in God, what is the point? Why are you there? What do you preach about? I'm used to these questions. I've been fielding them since childhood, and I imagine many of you have fielded similar questions whenever you've discussed your religious belonging or where you go to church or any number of similar questions. It can be very challenging to explain Unitarian Universalism in any kind of succinct manner. Perhaps we should all just say the answer is under construction. Our coming of age class this next month will be working on their elevator speeches, where they try to explain Unitarian Universalism in an elevator ride, so maybe they'll solve it for us, and then we'll be all set. One tactic I've used is just to explain the origin of the name, because it's a mouthful. Of course, we often abbreviate it to UU, which once really confused my aunt, who told a friend, "I don't know, but they go to a church that's just called U." But sometimes I'll explain, oh, well, there were Unitarians who believed in one God, not the Trinity. Jesus was a human teacher. And there were the Universalists who believed that nobody got damned to hell. And then they sort of got together in the 1960s and ditched most of the Christianity. Sometimes I tell the time-honored joke that Universalists believed that God was too good to damn anyone's, and Unitarians believed they were too good to be damned. Another tactic is to explain what we believe and value now. I often have mentioned the 7 principles that came up in this morning's reading, but as many of us know, it's very possible that these will no longer be a current part of our bylaws after this summer's General Assembly. If the new draft of Article 2 passes, it will be 6 values with love in the center instead of 7 principles in a numbered list. As I've said from the pulpit before, like many people, I was surprised and somewhat appalled when I learned the 7 principles were being replaced, or rather that a proposal for new language was coming before the General Assembly to be voted on and amended. As anyone who attended General Assembly this summer, like Tony and Jerry and Craig and Melinda did, they can tell you that we did consider a lot of amendments and we voted on all of them. And Reverend Jamie recently pointed out on our email list that there is an important amendment that references reason and science as part of our faith tradition after some concerns were raised about its absence. It was understandable for me to be surprised about the principles. After all, as I've mentioned before, we're the same age, and I was raised on them as a UU kid in the 90s. But also, I kind of shouldn't have been surprised. If there's anything I know about Unitarian Universalism, it's that we change. That ever-changing nature is a blessing and a curse. Sometimes we cling to things we need to let go of, and other times it seems we maybe throw out things that feel core and sacred to people. And also, it's a beautiful thing. We can have a service where we start with rank by rank, again we stand, honoring our history, and we can close with building a new way. We can meet in this historical meeting house, and we can have a disco ball on the ceiling and solar panels on our roof. What do we choose to keep, and what do we choose to change? It's a really challenging question. It's not surprising that Unitarians were grappling with it back in the 19th century, that Theodore Parker was preaching about this topic. This was a classic Unitarian sermon, a distillation of the Unitarian thinking of his day. For Parker, the core of Unitarian Christianity, the core of Christianity, period, was the teachings of Jesus. To love God and love neighbor and behave accordingly. Even those who criticize Christianity can't find fault with those teachings, he says. And I think that's reasonably true, even today. There are plenty of faults that one can find with many different Christians, but it's hard to find fault with that particular set of teachings. Loving God, loving others, that seems pretty positive. But Parker doesn't just argue that Jesus' teachings are solid. He argues that God definitely exists and calls the Bible the true Word of God with a capital W. That is something that most UUs would not say. Yes, definitely some of us believe in God, and some of us include the Bible in our spiritual practices. But very few of us spend time arguing God's existence or proclaiming the Bible as the true Word. So, from a theologically Christian perspective, Parker's argument may ring very true. But from a Unitarian perspective, in the sense of those of us who inherited his legacy, we must say that that which he deemed core and permanent is not core and permanent for us. How disorienting it would probably be for those 19th century Unitarians to observe us now. What have we done with the place? But then again, how disorienting for the Puritans who founded First Parish to observe Parker. They would not have agreed with Parker that disputes over things like denominations were trivial, that we could, quote, turn away from the disputes of the Catholics and the Protestants, of the Unitarian and the Trinitarian, of old school and new school. They sailed all the way across the ocean to a new continent because they were so displeased with the Church of England. And they felt the best course of action was to live very far away so they could do Christianity their specific way, with a focus on the Bible and a certainty that some people were elect and saved by God. Indeed, we at First Parish have a very particular history and legacy as New England Unitarian Universalists. And that's its own blessing and curse. There's a lot of things that I really don't like about the Puritans and our history, and a lot of things that are rich and inspiring about being part of a congregation that goes back so many centuries. When I was in my ministerial internship out in California, the founders of that church were still alive. That congregation was founded in 1954, and the sanctuary was shaped like an upside-down boat, and there were no pews, there were just chairs. And there's a beautiful thing about that, too. Neither one is right or wrong. They're pretty different, though. But even out in California, that congregation met on Sunday mornings, sang hymns out of the gray hymnal, where lots of Christian hymns were just replaced by other words that took out the Jesus. They held a Christmas Eve service, and they celebrated Easter. They were also like secular Christmas, just with way less Puritan vibes. And I think that's how it is with dominant culture. As I mentioned in my Hanukkah sermon where I talked about Christian hegemony, it's just seeping in everywhere. It's the water we swim in, and it's hard to even see how weird it is until you're talking to folks who were raised outside that particular water and can see how very Christian we are in our shape and our culture. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's who we are. Our spiritual ancestors, the Unitarians and the Universalists, they were Christians. We come by it honestly. And I also don't really want the permanent of Unitarian Universalism to just be the cultural norms of meeting on Sunday mornings to hear sermons and sing hymns. For me, if I were to try to give Parker's sermon today, I would note that much of Unitarian Universalism is transient. Our bylaws change, our principles change, our ministers and staff change, don't we know it? And there are things that have felt very core to me, like the 7 principles, or like the hymn Spirit of Life that we sang this morning, which was my favorite growing up. But even though I love those things and feel that they are vital to my understanding of Unitarian Universalism, I don't think those are the permanent either. For me, it comes down to two things: the practice of covenant that we inherit from our Unitarian ancestors, and the commitment to every person that we inherit from our Universalist ancestors. Though I have many bones to pick with our Puritan forebears in terms of their theology and culture, I deeply appreciate their commitment to congregational polity, to self-governing churches, and to how we make decisions together. In 1648, a group of New England Puritans came up with, and I quote, "a platform of church discipline gathered out of the Word of God and agreed upon by the elders and messengers of the churches assembled in the synod at Cambridge in New England," which thankfully we now just refer to as the Cambridge Platform. Much easier to say. And though it does contain a creedal statement about belief in certain things, the bulk of the document focuses on decision-making and on the concept of covenanting together and making agreements as free individuals. Centuries later, the famous Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams would also focus on covenant. He wrote a short piece called The 5 Ingredients of Covenant, in which he writes, "Human beings, individually and collectively, become human by making commitments, by making promises." He also notes that covenant is for individuals as well as the collective. And in the 5th ingredient, he claims, "The covenant includes a rule of law, but it is not fundamentally a legal covenant. It depends upon faithfulness, and faithfulness is nerved by loyalty, by love. Violation of the covenant is a violation of trust." Love, right there at the center. And from our Universalist ancestors we get, well, universalism. The idea that nobody is damned, nobody is beyond God's love, or to put it in today's language, beyond the redeeming, transforming power of love. This one can be a tough one. And I find it very understandable that many would want to assign that love to God, because it is very hard to personally love everyone, and especially those who have done great harm and remain unrepentant. But universalism is key to our faith. Hosea Ballou, who was known as the father of universalism, broke with the orthodoxy of his day by preaching that rather than Jesus paying off the debt of humanity to satisfy an angry God, Jesus' death instead released a great spirit of love to draw people into the arms of a loving God. Not only that, but Ballou extended this spirit of love to all people, even those who were not Christians, which was a radical move for his time and place. And in fact, Ballou was one of what was known as the ultra-universalists, because he believed in immediate salvation upon death, with no cleansing period of suffering being required before redemption. People are just loved by God, period, he said. And so these two elements are at the crux of how I describe Unitarian Universalism when people ask me what it is. That's my elevator speech, that we are people who make agreements with one another. We break our promises and we work to make it right again and to come back into covenant. That we are people who believe everyone is sacred and everyone matters and nobody is beyond deserving love. And these practices and beliefs do guide me. Whether it's making agreements with my housemates or with people I'm organizing with, whether it's the universalism that drives my commitment to prison abolition, to my work for peace and justice, these are key pieces of not just my work, but my life. And I see those practices here too. I see them as you all make agreements in your small groups, in your committees, and as you struggle to figure out questions like, who speaks for First Parish in public, which was a conversation we had a while back up in the bacon room. And I see your love for all people, as you give generously to migrants living in Bedford, or thoughtfully consider how to make room for more voices here in the congregation, and as you work to prevent the few from destroying the planet for the many. Will time prove that covenant and universalism are the real permanent in Unitarian Universalism? Will I be the one who got it right, unlike Parker? Probably not. Change is the one thing we can count on. But just as the pure religion of Jesus was enough for Parker, how it fueled his life and his commitments and made him proclaim that as long as someone had that, their faith would comfort them in the time of trial, I would say that these aspects of Unitarian Universalism do this for me. And ultimately, that's what we're here for, to make meaning of our lives together. We're up against a lot, we humans. And I know that many of us are struggling. I know there are medical diagnoses and events that we did not expect or want. I know that there are mental health concerns. I know that there are practical struggles around employment and finances. I know that we are concerned for those we love. I know that many of us are struggling always to stay hopeful as we hear horrific news stories, as we hear about another shooting, as we hear about more and more violence and death. And I think what matters most in Unitarian Universalism, in any gathering of people who are gathering for the purposes of spirituality or religion or ethics, is that we can be together and be better together. For us to show up for one another in caring ways and in ways that help us to grapple with being human. If we're doing that, it doesn't really matter to me what pieces are permanent and what pieces change. Whether we keep this or that hymn, this or that bylaw, this or that practice. The biggest blessing of Unitarian Universalism is not the ism at all. It's the Unitarian Universalists. It's the people. It's the community. The most transient and the most permanent aspect of all of it. I invite you to join in singing our closing hymn. It is "We Are Building a New Way" in our teal hymnal. And it's got a number 2 as well that I don't have in front of me. What's the number? 1017. It's 1017. 1017 in your teal hymnal.
Amen.
as we continue to shape this living tradition with its ever-changing nature and all its blessings and curses, let us hold on to what helps us to make meaning, what helps us to be better together, and what helps us to shape a congregation that will welcome more and more people into this circle of love. May it be so.